So this little talk goes back to a conversation that I had when I first came to Aish Torah. Being from a non-observant background, I grew up culturally very Jewishly, but without any real knowledge of anything Jewish. My parents' friends were all basically Jewish. We did the Jewish food. We had the Jewish sense of humor thing. And I noticed you seem to have different tastes in food and different sense of humor. But the first question I asked when I came to Israel 40 years ago this month, Rabbi Noach Weinberg, the Rosh Yeshiva of blessed memory, I asked Rabbi Weinberg, are Jews different? And if we were live in a classroom, I would ask everyone to raise their hands. And most people, when I ask that question, I would say about 3/4 of the audience raise their hands for the "are Jews are different?" But the question gets interesting when I ask what accounts for the difference. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the great debate over nature versus nurture. We are who we are because of our external environment or because of internally our genes. And in this particular question, people get very uncomfortable when you ask that question, by the way, because as soon as you talk about being internally different, or we talk about something racist or not, and the question is not a simple one. Even if we decide that somehow Jews are somehow different than non-Jews, there's no question environment plays a role, because I travel around the world. Like right now, I'm not in Israel, I'm in Germany, but Jews wherever you are in the world are affected by their environment. Canadian Jews are different than American Jews. America's so big that Jews in New York are different than West Coast Jews. I heard a funny joke that illustrates this point about how culture plays a role on strengths and weaknesses of a country. It goes like this: in the best of all possible worlds, the soldiers are British, the cooks are French, the lovers are Italian, and the engineers are German. And in the worst of all possible worlds, the soldiers are French, the cooks are British, the engineers are Italian, and the lovers are German. I mean, no one goes to England for the food, and Fiat used to say jokingly stands for "Fix It Again, Tony." I'm going to buy my leather jacket in Italy, but I'm going to buy my car in Germany. So we know that definitely environment plays a role. But the question is, what is the primary understanding of the difference between Jews and non-Jews, assuming they are different? I'm not the first person to ask this question, by the way. A lot of famous non-Jews have addressed this question. The first quote that I'm going to read to you guys is from the famous American author Mark Twain, who real name is Samuel Clemens, author of lots of novels, late 19th, early 20th century. And Mark Twain writes in his essay concerning the Jews, he says, if statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous dim puff of smoke lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He's as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his number. He's made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. All things are mortal but the Jew, all other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? And Mark Twain's pointing out, a few interesting things and asking how it is we're still around. But the thing he's focusing on is, why are Jews so disproportionately impactful, despite often being a great disadvantage to other people? Another great quote of someone who also took note of this Jews seem to be different kind of thing is the American Dutch sociologist Ernst van den Haag, who wrote this very interesting book in 1969 called The Jewish Mystique. And in it, he asks, asked to make a list of the men who have most dominated thinking of the modern world, many educated people would name Freud, Einstein, Marx, and Darwin. Of these four, only Darwin was not Jewish. In a world where Jews are only a tiny percentage of the population, what is the secret of the disproportionate importance the Jews have had in the history of Western culture? So, the joke is, the four most influential people, 3 were Jewish and 1 was wrong. I'm not sure that's true at all. I'm not a big fan of Marx. Einstein's held up well. Darwin, by the way, who's the one non-Jew in that list, is the one who is actually the most God-believing of all of those people. But he's pointing out that given the teeny tiny percentage of the world that's Jewish, how is it that Jews are so radically transformative in their thinking and have been so influential in the world? So to understand the answer to the question, what makes Jews different, the enigma of the Jewish soul, we have to look at this idea we call spiritual genetics, because Judaism would say that, well, culture and environment definitely plays a role. Like I said, Jews in Canada might be different from American Jews because of the cultural influence. The essential difference is internal. Let's call it spiritual DNA. And we all know about biological DNA because proven fact. You pass on genes to your children. I always love looking at the children of parents to see which model the kids are. Is the daddy model, the mommy model, the hybrid model? So Judaism says that this works not just in terms of external physical personality traits, but also internally, that you pass on these traits. And to understand this idea, we have to understand that Judaism has this concept that there were original nations, 70 original nations in the world, and the original nations were like giant extended family trees. Parents have children, have children, have children, and just as you can, as the tree expands, go backwards and show how everyone comes from common biological offspring, so too personality traits are also shared and spread throughout that tree. And there's a common sort of personality that each of these nations had. It's not just unique to the Jewish people. Now, the problem with this is, first of all, you can't see it in a microscope. And second of all, these nations aren't around. But the idea being that if you could beam yourself back in time to the ancient world, you bump into someone on the street and talk to him and you go, oh God, that guy's such a Canaanite, or he's such a Moabite, or what an Ammonite thing to do, that kind of thing. So again, these nations are gone, but the Jewish people are one of the oldest surviving peoples on the planet Earth. And while a lot of people have opted out of the Jewish people, I always say for everyone Jewish, there's probably about 200 non-Jews who have Jewish ancestry. And many people have joined the Jewish people. The core of who we are, Judaism explains, goes back on a spiritual, biological level to Abraham and Sarah, the progenitors of the Jewish people. And if you understand their personality, you collectively kind of get the Jewish personality, given that all people like snowflakes and all Jews were all a little different from each other. No two human beings and no two Jews are identical on a spiritual level, on a personality level, biologically, but that we have certain collective Jewish personality that goes back to Abraham and Sarah. And, in Genesis 18:19, God says about Abraham, for I have known him, meaning Abraham, because he will command his children and his household after him to keep God's ways, doing charity and justice. So if we look further into this idea, I would say there are like three core kind of Jewish personality traits that exemplify the Jewish people. The first is radically transformative thinking. We already kind of looked at that with the quote from Ernst van den Haag. He said of these people whose ideas have so transformed the world, the three should be Jewish in the modern world is pretty wild. But what does it take to push radically transformative ideas onto the world? So the second, I'd say, core personality trait of the Jews is drive, disproportionate impact, or like unstoppable force. Now, again, non-Jews can be radically transformative. It's not unique to Jews. Non-Jews can be driven, but Jews have, as we say, we have these traits in spades, like a disproportionate amount of this. The third trait that we see in Abraham that really manifests itself in the Jewish people until today is chesed, caring. That again, Jews are disproportionately obsessed with caring for the world, the idea of tikkun olam. So again, non-Jews can have all three of these traits, but Jews have them disproportionately. The problem with this is, unlike DNA that you can actually look at in a microscope, if you got a good enough microscope, you can't see these traits under a microscope. They're spiritual, they're like ethereal, but you certainly can see them, demonstrate them by looking at just some statistics, which make them stand out like a flashing, red light. For instance, I love asking people when I'm traveling, like I just recently was on a plane, if I'm sitting next to people and I can engage them in a conversation, I ask them, how many people are in the world? How many Jews are in the world? And the answers, and the answers are fascinating. People usually I've had people give me 10 to 100 times more Jews in the world than there really are. And the answer is, why are people always grossly exaggerating the number of Jews they think there are in the world? I actually have had at least 24 people tell me there is many Jews in the world as Chinese, and most of them were actually Asians. And the answer goes back to exactly these points. One guy once told me, actually, on a plane, that everyone in Hollywood is a Jew who got a nose job and changed his name. I said, you're pretty anti-Semitic, but 50% correct. Ever since I found out that Scarlett Johansson is Jewish, I know anything's possible. I just have to get her to like a girls' seminary in Jerusalem, and I could probably get like 20,000 guys to go to yeshiva there also. But the answer to that question goes back exactly to what I'm talking about. That people so overestimate the number of Jews precisely because of these traits that we have within us. You know, the world's population has got 7.8 billion people in it, and of whom only 14 million are Jewish. So rather than people thinking there are as many of us as there are Chinese, which is 20% of the world's population, we're actually only 0.2% of the world's population. Yet when you look at Jewish disproportionate impact on the world, like what is the prize given by the guy who invented TNT from Sweden, who wanted to be known for something besides explosives and destruction? Answer is the Nobel Prize, which is given in a few certain categories, medicine, economics, Nobel Prize for Peace, etc. If Jews are 0.2% of the world's population, how many Nobel Prizes should the Jewish people have? The answer is less than 1%, because we're not even 1% of the population. Statistically, that's what we should have. But I'll read you from what I found online it says at least 210 Jews and people of half or three-quarters Jewish ancestry have been awarded the Nobel Prizes, accounting for 22% of all individual recipients worldwide between 1901 and 2021. That's constituting 36% of all US recipients during this same period. You get how ridiculous that is? That's insane. 22% of all the Nobel Prizes are coming from 0.2% of the world's population. I'm not doing this to brag about Jews. It's just, it so sticks out. That's 11,500% more Nobel Prizes than we should have. And if you look in America, for instance, which, by the way, is I ask people how many Jews are in America, which is the largest diaspora Jewish community in the world. The answer is less than 2% of America's Jewish. It's 1.7%. Yet Jews are on average about 10% of the professionals in the US, 10% of the universities, the student body of universities. The better the school, the more the Jews. Like Ivy League schools are usually about 25% Jewish, from the professors on down, a lot of them. So we see wherever we look, you see this disproportionate impact given our teeny tiny size. And it's not just, because maybe people try to explain it, maybe it's just this unique combination of Jews being in the United States. If this is something that is real, like an experiment in science, wherever I drop an object on the planet Earth, gravity should do the same everywhere. Wherever we look geographically, and wherever we look chronologically in history, we see this disproportionate Jewish impact. If you go to Germany pre-Holocaust, and I love asking people like what percentage of Germany was Jewish pre-Holocaust? People throw out these crazy numbers. It was 1/3 Jewish, it was 20% Jewish. Germany was 0.6% Jewish, a third of what it is in America. Yet pre-Holocaust, 60% of the lawyers, 10% of the doctors and dentists, 70% of the bankers, 70% of department stores, and a huge number of university professors were Jewish. And again, the point is to illustrate that the reality of disproportionate Jewish impact seems to be innate in who we are, wherever we are in the world at any period of time. If you go back in Germany 1,000 years, you see the same thing. Jews are the great middlemen of everything in medieval Europe: trade, finance, diplomacy, knowledge. My family is originally from Speyer in Germany. And there's a quote from Bishop Rudiger Holtzmann of Speyer from the 11th century. He writes, "Wishing to make Speyer into a city, I thought to increase its honor 1,000-fold by bringing in Jews." You can be sure the Bishop of Speyer was not a big fan of Jews. Very few people in medieval Europe were big fans of Jews. But he recognized that Jews are such a dynamic force that having a few hundred Jewish families living in a large city in Europe would change the economy of the city, and they'd be able to build a cathedral because they have the money for it. So we see wherever we look disproportionate impact. I have this book, which is called What Do They Think of the Jews? Really interesting book, huge book. And anyone of fame or semi-fame who's ever said anything about us is in this book. And it's interesting when you look at the quotes in the book, some of these people like Jews, some of them don't like us, some of them are kind of neutral, but they all see the drive. Some of them see it positively, some of them see it negatively. A great example is the quote from the famous German author, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And it's one of my favorite quotes in the book. He says, "Energy is the basis of everything. Every Jew, no matter how insignificant, is engaged in some decisive and immediate pursuit of a goal. It is the most perpetual people of the earth." He says, we're always on the move. Every Jew is in pursuit of a goal. Jews never sit around. We're always like doing something, intensity, high energy level. My favorite quote about this, it comes from a famous British psychoanalyst from the mid-20th century. His name was Ernst Jones, and such a great quote. He said, whatever other qualities Jews may possess, likable or the reverse, no one who knows them well can deny that they are personally interesting. By that I mean especially alive, alert, quick at comprehending people and events and making pungent or witty comments on them. One might at times find their rather hothouse family atmosphere with its intensities and frictions somewhat trying, but one could be sure of never being bored. Such a great quote, especially that last line. The intensities and frictions somewhat trying. That, in my opinion, is the single best description of Israel, that quote. And when I'm teaching this class, which is often in Israel, I love telling the audience, I'm going to give you an experiential homework assignment. Now, I know you guys are in Toronto and you're not in Israel at the moment, but hopefully now that everything's opened up, you'll be able to come back soon. But I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have been to Israel multiple times. I always tell my audiences, like, take note of the following few things, because when you're somewhere for a while, you get used to the change. And initially, sort of like the first couple of nights you're in Jerusalem and the loudspeaker goes off, Allahu Akbar, you hear it for the first few nights. When you're there like 40 years in Israel, like I am, I don't even notice it anymore. It's background noise. But I tell people, notice before you get used to it. Notice in Israel, the energy is, and the best way to see it is notice how the horn and the gas pedal seem to be connected in Israel. Notice how the colors on a traffic light seem to be red, honk, and then green. Notice how regulations seem to be only suggestions. That please, excuse me, and thank you exist in the Hebrew language and are in a dictionary, but are not necessarily used in spoken Hebrew that often. I remember when we married off our first daughter, we had 720 people at the wedding because my son-in-law, Yemenite, had like 350 first cousins. We insisted the kids, we said, you got to write thank you notes. It's a very American, Canadian, British thing to do. We couldn't find any thank you notes in Israel. We went to the biggest Kravitz department store in Jerusalem and we asked for thank you notes. And the guy said, Yisraelim lo omrim todah. Israelis don't say thank you. Now the energy is so intense. You get in a taxi in Israel and the taxi cab driver is if you speak Hebrew or he speaks English, the whole way he's giving you all his answers to the world's problems. Because what are Israelis? Think about it. What are Israelis? Israelis are Jews unfiltered by foreign influence. Because like I said at the beginning, when we live amongst other people, we get a veneer, a coating. Like Canadians, I know you guys love saying sorry all the time. It's a Canadian thing to do, I always say, a British person's idea of a personal question is, what time is it? Because in England, we learn you don't do that kind of stuff. But when people are raised Jews in a Jewish homeland amongst Jews, you can see that Jewish person come out. And there's where you really see the energy. It can be a little overwhelming. I always tell people, spend a week, 2 weeks in Israel, and then go back to where you came from. Don't try on an El Al flight. An El Al flight is like mini Israel. It's like 300 plus Jews all cramped into a small space with the flight attendants giving you advice. I once flew from Israel, stopped in New York, and then continued on to Indianapolis, Midwest. And I remember I'm standing outside the airport in Indianapolis, just like waiting to be picked up. And I'm feeling like, Gentiles, I'm not saying anything negative about non-Jews. It's like a mantra for meditation. It's so relaxing. I think my blood pressure drops like 30 points when I leave Israel. But so we see this is that Jewish personality. You see that drive. You see it in Israel. You see it in Jewish overaccomplishment. But this drive also has this drive also has a negative side to it. What's the most oft-repeated criticism of the Jewish people in the Bible by God Himself? In the book of Exodus, He calls us Am Kashi Oref, a stiff-necked people. What does it mean, stiff-necked? It doesn't mean I got a neck injury. It means stubborn. And that's a very, very Jewish trait. Again, non-Jews can be stubborn too, but Jews are disproportionately stubborn people. The Midrash, which Midrash is rabbinic literature, very based on information that goes back to Mount Sinai, often filling in details in the 5 books of Moses that are not directly in the story, but giving us greater insight. The Midrash in Exodus Rabbah, Shmot Rabbah 42:9, talks about exactly this point. It says, what is meant by saying Jews are stiff-necked, which is from the golden calf story. Rav Yakim said, the Midrash goes on, Rav Yakim said, there are 3 who are inherently chutzpahdik. That's the word, by the way, chutzpah. It's such a Jewish word, most non-Jews can't even say that. They can't get the chas out. They can't say simcha either. But what does chutzpah mean? Audacity, nerve, gumption, spunk. So the Midrash says there are 3 who are inherently chutzpahdik, the dog amongst the animals, the rooster amongst the birds, and the Jew amongst the nations. You might think this is something negative, but it's really praise. It means that a Jew would rather be hanged than give up his Judaism. Rav Abin said, to this very day, a Jew in diaspora is called stiff-necked. And he's talking about a long time ago. And that trait has not changed throughout history. But what the Midrash is saying is that this is a necessary trait. It has a negative side to it, but we have to have it to stand up to the world, to introduce radically transformative ideas into the world. The idea, to connect the world that's all worshiping idols with the concept of one infinite invisible God. When everyone else is worshiping idols, to go against the tide of human civilization, to suffer incredible persecution, to be willing to die for your beliefs, to transform the world in ways that very few people appreciate, how much Jewish software is embedded in collective human consciousness, you gotta be very, very stiff-necked. But it has a negative side to it also, because stiff-necked means what? It makes for a very argumentative, divided kind of people. And this is really a character trait of Jews. A lot of Jewish humor, by the way, portrays this, like that famous joke about a Jew gets stranded on a desert island. Remember, like that movie with Tom Hanks, Castaway? Yeah, he has to build 2 synagogues, one that he goes to and one that he doesn't go to, because every Jew has to have a synagogue he doesn't pray in. And that story, which may be apocryphal or not, I don't know if it's true or not, but the story about Harry Truman, President of the United States, when Israel became a state in 1948, speaking to David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, and he says, you have no idea what it's like to be the president of a country of like 130 million people. I think it was 1.5 million people, something like that. 150 million people at the time. And Ben-Gurion says, you're right, but you have no idea what it's like to be the prime minister of a country of 1.5 million prime ministers. Because it's easier to be the emperor of 1 billion Chinese than the mayor of a town of 100 Jews. I'm not saying anything negative about Chinese. We're very fractious, argumentative people. I remember, the U.S. just pulled out of Afghanistan in the summer, but I remember when the U.S. first went into Afghanistan after 9/11, 2001, the first night of Hanukkah, the CNN reporter goes into the only functioning synagogue left in Afghanistan, which used to have tens of thousands of Jews living in it. He finds the last 2 Jews living in Afghanistan, in Kabul, the first night of Hanukkah, lighting menorahs on either side of the synagogue and not speaking to each other. And even the non-Jewish CNN reporter realized this is insane. And he walks up to these 2 guys. One was named Levi, and the other was named Simon-Tov. Levi's since passed on. Simon-Tov was recently in the news not that long ago when the U.S. was pulling out of Afghanistan. But he goes up to the older of the 2, Levi, and he says, you guys, are the only two Jews left in the country. Can't you even light a menorah on Hanukkah together? And Levi says, I'm 70 years old. I've lived through everything in this country. I've lived through the Muslims, the Soviet invasion, the Taliban, the US invasion. But that guy Simantov, he's evil. And I was like laughing and crying at the same time. I fell out of my seat. That's the Jewish personality. The argumentative nature, the fractiousness. We see it all the time. It makes for incredibly ideologically motivated people who will stand up against any kind of pressure, but it makes for one of the most divisive, if not the most divisive group of people on the planet Earth is the Jewish people, which has always been a huge challenge. One of the great themes that I talk about when I speak about Jewish history is the incredible challenge of leading and unifying the Jewish people. It is the toughest job in the world. Leaders who would have been the greatest leaders in the Jewish world, and they led other people, we chew them up and spit them out because it's such a difficult job. Okay, but let's keep going on. So now we appreciate that the drive, these traits have negative sides to them, as every one of us has traits that have positive and negative sides to them. But what else? We talked about drive. We talked about two other attributes that Jews collectively have that go back to Abraham and Sarah. And the second one is radically transformative thinking. This is part of that Jewish personality, so much so. Remember Jonathan Sacks, the late, great Jonathan Sacks, what a mind. He wrote a book called Radical Then, Radical Now. This is really a Jewish personality trait. Non-Jews could be radical thinkers, but Jews are disproportionately so. Ernst von den Haag, again, that American-Dutch sociologist, he wrote in his book, The Jewish Mystique, he says, of all groups, Jews are most prone to expectation of radical change. Although very few Jews are radicals, very many radicals are Jews. Out of 100 Jews, 5 may be radical, but out of 10 radicals, 5 are likely to be Jewish. What attracts them so disproportionately to radical causes? And again, it goes back to this Abraham and Sarah, that we just think outside the box. It leads to an incredible amount of nonconformity and creativity, the ability to look at things differently, to question things. As we all know, that joke about, what's the answer to a Jewish question? Another question. Why? Why not? We'll just keep asking. This is the Jewish personality. And again, you can't see this in a microscope, but you see this so much in how many Jews, like Jerry Rubin, A.B. Hoffman, you look at the history of radicalism in the West in the 60s, there's so many Jews involved in radically transformative, especially political ideology. We talk about the political left, communism, socialism. I mean, these are ideas that are basically driven by Jews. Edmund Wilson is an American literary critic. He had in the mid 20th century, he had a great quote. He said, "The Jew lends himself easily to communism." I mean, it's natural for Jews to be communists because it enables him, the Jew, to devote himself to a high cause involving all of humanity, characteristics which are natural to him as a Jew. What's fascinating is he completely nails the Jewish personality as a non-Jew, and he talks about it being innate in Jews. He says what attracts Jews to transformative political ideologies, revolutionary movements, is it's a high cause, that it's a top-down solution that involves all of humanity. That's what Abraham was about. He was the ultimate top-down high cause, bringing the idea of one God, one standard of morality to the human race. That is as revolutionary as it gets. And the fact that he says it's natural, meaning it's innate in who we are as Jews. And if you look at the history of the Russian Revolution and communism and socialism in the last couple hundred years, you see, besides the fact that Karl Marx was the creator of communism, and he was Jewish by birth, although certainly not a practicing Jew. Rosa Luxemburg, Leon Blum, the socialist prime minister of France. The Russian Revolution, with the exception of Lenin, was a Jewish orchestrated event. Leon Trotsky, who was in line, if he hadn't been killed by Stalin, would have been possibly the leader of the Soviet Union after Lenin. Grigory Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev. Literally, the history of progressive left-wing politics is a who's who of Jews. And I have a whole presentation just on this called Universalism and Particularism. Maybe when I can figure out how to use, when I'm back in Jerusalem, don't have to rely on my Mac and I can show you the proper PowerPoint. I'll come back if you guys invite me back again, and I'll do it for you. It's such an interesting topic, just this specific issue of how Jews are so radically transformative. And what does Judaism say about how we're supposed to be from the Jewish perspective? That's not our topic for today. But again, that radically transformative ideology, it's part and parcel of the innate Jewish personality. It goes along with that drive. And think of it, it's perfect. Take a radically transformative person who's incredibly driven, and you get a small group of people who are capable of bringing about huge change collectively in the human race. So what's the third trait that we have? And that is chesed, caring. Another word that even it's hard for non-Jews to say because they have the ch sound. Now, non-Jews can care too, but Jews are disproportionately obsessed with caring, with taking care of the world. I remember about a decade ago, they do these Pew research studies on, and I remember more than a decade ago, they said the word Jew to Jews. And the number one response, I think it was 2012 actually, at over 50%, I think, was commitment to social justice. Meaning when you ask Jews, the vast majority of Jews are not observant Jews. About half the Jews in America, I know, are not even connected to, are not affiliated. But when you ask them what Judaism is about, they basically say it's social justice. Jews disproportionately care for the world. Again, it's not just Jews, but you take any cause to make the world a better place in the last 150, 200 years, if it isn't created by Jews, it's overwhelmingly disproportionately run by Jews. Like I said, communism, socialism, feminism, Black civil rights, anti-apartheid, Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International. It goes on and on and on. It's insane. The labor unions in the United States, crazy how Jews are so hyper involved in even non-Jewish causes, like the third largest Christian charity in the world is the Salvation Army, which was founded by William Booth, who was an Anglican minister from England. I looked into his lineage. His mother was a Jew from Nottingham, England. Jews love fixing the world. American Red Cross was co-founded by Jews, ASPCA, Social Security system, the March of Dimes. It's nuts. Nothing gets a Jew more excited than trying to fix the world. It's again, so we see these three traits: incredible drive, radically transformative thinking, and that we care. I mean, that goes back. Caring was Abraham's original outreach technique. He tried to bring people to God by emulating God, giving unconditionally with love. So this is the Jewish personality. This is what sets the Jews apart. And like I said several times before, non-Jews can have these traits, but Jews overwhelmingly, disproportionately have these traits. And non-Jews see it. And when we quote non-Jews, it has more credibility because we never believe what we say about ourselves. We're subjective. But we also appreciate that these traits are not necessarily positive. I mean, this isn't a class about how great Jews are. These traits can enable Jews to come up with very destructive ideas, patterns, behaviors, things like communism and socialism, especially communism, is an ideology. While Jews are certainly not responsible for the suffering caused by communism, it's an idea which has, in my opinion as a historian, caused more death and suffering than certainly any political ideology in human history. Possibly up to 100 million people have died under communist systems in the last 100 or so years. But radically transformative thinking and drive can also make for a lot of Jews doing bad things in big ways, because whatever we Jews do, it's going to be big. It could be big good stuff. It could be big bad stuff. Take the biggest financial scandals in Wall Street, and you'll see, Ivan Boesky, Bernie Madoff, Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, whatever scandals are going to be that are really going to catch the attention of the media in a big way. Very often, Jews will sadly be involved in those scandals, because when you take Jews who have that transformative way of thinking, they're going to, be able to think outside the box and scam the system or come up with a great idea to make money, which might not be legal. Even organized crime, which in and of itself is a very fascinating topic. Jews have played a disproportionate role in organized crime throughout history. The crime wasn't organized by the Italians. It's only when Meyer Lansky in the early 20th century teams up with the Italian guy Lucky Luciano does crime get organized. And then, of course, Jews invent Lansky and Bugsy Siegel invent a crime syndicate called Murder Incorporated, so they could write the bullets off as a tax deduction. That was a joke. But we see that that drive is a neutral force. It can push us to do tremendous good in the world, to transform the world, a la Abraham, to bring lots of fantastic causes into the world. It can have Jews pushed into doing every ism in the world you can possibly imagine, also Jews doing a lot of negative and bad stuff. So you put it all together and we see this is that Jewish personality. And again, like some people see it as a positive, some people see it as a negative, but people see it definitely. Churchill, who happened to like Jews and was a big supporter of Zionism, has a great quote. He said, some people like Jews and some do not, but no thoughtful man can deny the fact that they are beyond any question the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has appeared in the world. And it's interesting and scary that sometimes the people that hate us the most get us the best. And if you think of who the greatest Jew hater of the last 100 or so years was obviously Adolf Hitler. And Hitler, I'll read you a quote from Hitler, which is pretty unbelievable. He says, if only one country for whatever reason tolerates a Jewish family, and that family will become the germ center for fresh sedition. If one little Jewish boy survives without any Jewish education, with no synagogue and no Hebrew school, it's in his soul. Even if there had never been a synagogue or a Jewish school of the Old Testament, the Jewish spirit would still exist and exert its influence. It has been there from the very beginning, and there is no Jew, not a single one, who does not personify it. Now, I know it sounds weird to quote Hitler. People get uncomfortable with it, but I'm saying that here's a man who is so intense in his opposition to the Jews, precisely because, and it's not a class on anti-Semitism, but he viewed Jews, as small as we were, as being a people who had an innate, incredible energy and power and worldview that was diametrically opposed to his worldview. And he says that no Jew, not a single one, doesn't personify it. I say often when I'm guiding in Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Site in Israel, that Hitler isn't evil because of understanding of the Jews. He understands Jews incredibly well, better than a lot of people understand Jews, including a lot of Jews. He's evil because of his reaction to the understanding, but he sees how transformative the Jewish people are on a deep ideological level. So you put it all together, and we see this drive as absolutely a reality, and non-Jews see it all the time. I wanted to go back to a little more personal story. When I remember, I've always been a very social person, even before social media. I've always kept track of my friends. Even today, I still organize reunions of, when I go back to America, of my friends of mine from elementary school. Sometimes the only time they see each other living a few miles apart is when I come from thousands of miles away. I've always done this. And I remember when I got back from Israel, I'm now in Israel this month, 40 years. But I remember I had been in Israel for 6 months, and I was in my dangerous, I would call it my Shiite phase of being a Baal Tshuva, I jokingly call it. When you just become religious in your early 20s, you're on fire, and you're an Aish Torah, and you want to transform the world, because Rabbi Weinberg was really into doing that. And very dangerous time to let these people loose on their friends and family, because you're really on fire. And I remember I come back to America after 6 months in Israel, and I organize a little reunion of about a dozen of my friends. From most of them were college friends, but some were from high school. And about half of them were Jewish, half of them were non-Jewish. And we're all 22, 23 years old. And everyone except for me is talking about the same thing: their work, their grad school, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, or their stuff. And I'm talking about God and the Jewish meaning in history and Tikkun Olam and transforming the world. And you could cut the room like a knife, the dividing between the Jews and the non-Jews. It's interesting, and I like to ask, if you were live in an audience, I'd ask you, like, how do you think my non-Jewish friends were reacting to me ranting about Judaism? And it's interesting. They were like leaning forward, eyes wide open, fascinated. My best friend in college was the son of a Lutheran minister. His name was John Frenzel. He grew up in upstate New York, Colden, New York, near Buffalo. Had 3 sisters named Faith, Hope, and Charity. Never met a Jew in his life till he ended up rooming with 3 of them at Vassar, where I went. I had to talk him out of getting on a plane and coming back to Israel with me, converting. He was so into it. And so it's weird. My non-Jews were fat. My non-Jewish friends were fascinated. My Jewish friends, they were like, forget it. They were like defensive body language, turned away. This is BC, before cell phones, but they were looking at their watches. I said, I'm thinking, Ken, shut up, because if you talk for 2 more minutes about Judaism, you're only going to have Gentiles as friends. And the question is like, why? Shouldn't my Jewish friends have been all excited that I was lighting them up with all the wisdom I learned that was part of their heritage? And this brings me to the point as we come to a close now about what I want to focus on now. We Jews are, again, we are very stiff-necked people, very ideologically motivated. Even a Jew with no Jewish software package, when you push Jews, we are the stiff-necked people. We're going to push back. You preach to Jews, they're not going to want to listen. It's such an important lesson when we're trying to reach out to friends and family and connect them Jewishly, that we have to do it in a judgmental way, with no pressure and with love. But we also have to recognize, because we are such driven people, we tend to focus on what separates us and not what puts us together. And it's a big challenge for us to learn as Jewish people to recognize that, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, that we're all like leaves on this giant family tree. We have common ancestry. We come from the same great-grandmother and great-grandfather, Abraham and Sarah. On a very deep level, all of us really are part of the same family, and we really want the same thing. We have to make a paradigm shift as Jews to start focusing on what unites us and not what divides us. I'm not just talking about religious and secular. Anyone who's familiar with the religious world knows that world can also be very divisive, between Ashkenazim and Sephardim and modern Orthodox versus ultra-Orthodox, religious nationalists versus Haredi, Bells versus Satmar. This is critical, we understand this point, to recognize that we all have these traits within us. We're all brothers and sisters. And even if we don't agree with each other, we got to learn to respect each other. That's a huge point. But we also have to appreciate that the potential of the Jewish people, because we are so supercharged, is unbelievable if we can get the unity issue out of the way and focus the incredible energy and drive. And I always like to compare the Jewish people to a rocket ship. A rocket ship is a neutral device. It's the most powerful engine that the human race has created. And it could send a man to the moon, or it could send a nuclear warhead, God forbid, to another country. But a rocket ship needs a payload, it needs a guidance system, and it needs fuel. And it happens to be that the Jewish people, for us, one item plays all 3 roles, because if you don't have the fuel and you don't have the guidance system, the rocket ship is either not going to reach its destination or it's not going to go in the right direction. And for us, what is the rocket system and the fuel happens to be one thing, and the payload is Torah, the values that we get from the creator of the universe. The Talmud in Tractate Beitzah has a great quote on page 25b. It says, why was the Torah given to Israel? It says, because they're aggressive and stubborn. If the Torah had not been given to Israel, no nation or tongue could withstand them. Basically, it's the Talmud's way of basically saying, if Jews didn't have Torah, we'd destroy the world. And we see that misguided Jews who mean well, who have that drive, the radical transformative thinking, but don't have that software package that we call Torah, which gives us our values, that directs the drive. We can use that drive in ways that are not only not Jewish, they can be anti-Jewish, and things that are even, I would say, evil in this world. Jews can bring evil into the world too, unfortunately. So it's so important that we have the right guidance system to direct that drive individually and collectively in the right way. Rashi, the great medieval commentator in the Bible, when commenting on this quote made in the Talmud in Beitzah, he says, the Torah was given to the Jews because they're overly aggressive, and the Torah serves to moderate their energy and to subdue their heart. I call it like spiritual Prozac for the Jewish people. It's what enables us individually and collectively to take that and drive and push it in the right direction. So that's the guidance system, but it's also the rocket fuel, because a rocket without fuel, without enough fuel, isn't going to go very far. It's not going to reach its destination. Not only is Torah the thing that enables us to direct this drive in the right way, in a proper Jewish fashion, to really connect the world to God and elevate the world morally and spiritually where we're supposed to, but it's what keeps us Jewish. When Jews leave Judaism behind, it's like running out of the fuel. within 3 generations, usually 5 generations max, then we're no longer Jewish. We opt out of Judaism. So it's the perfect combination, is Jews for Judaism. The Zohar, which is the basic book of Jewish mysticism, has a great quote. It says, where's the quote? I'll find it. Here we go. It says, the Torah is like oil in a lamp, and Israel is its wick, causing the light of God to shine forth on all creation. Such a beautiful way of putting it. We're the hardware, the Jewish people, individually and collectively. Torah is the software, which means Jews for Judaism not only perpetuates the Jewish people, but Jews for Judaism are an incredible role model for the human race. And God knows the human race needs role models today. Unfortunately, it's one of the things I'm always harping on, is that we give far too much credence to athletes, actors and actresses, media personalities, people like that, who are not necessarily the best role models for us. They just have the public image. They're in the camera lens all the time. So we get to hear what they say, but the world's supposed to be hearing what we have to say as Jews. And that's our job. I always say we are the God squad. Our job is to take that incredible wisdom we get from the creator of the universe, to come together and focus the amazing energy we have in a unified way instead of dissipating it through arguing and fractiousness. Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote this incredible book called The Tipping Point, he says it doesn't take 100% of people to make change, not even 90%. You just need 10%. Imagine if just 10% of the Jews in the world were focusing our energy and this incredible drive with that wisdom we get, that transformative wisdom, which is Torah, which has given us the values that have transformed the world. The world would be in a completely different place. And the practical messaging for us on an individual, personal level, I know I'm preaching to the choir because I can't see all your faces, but I'm sure that you guys are all committed and knowledgeable, is number one, we have to be educated as Jews. That's what an organization like Aish Torah is about. Rabbi Weinberg, he talks about Torah being wisdom for living. You can't represent the Jewish people till you know what the Jewish people represents. We have to be educated as Jews and make education a top priority. Number two is we gotta focus on Jewish unity. This is what's killing us as Jews. We're fighting amongst each other. Anti-Semitism is going through the roof, and we're arguing. We have to get into our heads that the people who dislike us don't distinguish between what kind of Jew we are. Left wing, right wing, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, modern Orthodox, ultra Orthodox. They all look at us as Jews. The people who hate us, we have to start to do that ourselves. Look at each other as brothers and sisters, even if we don't agree. We don't have to agree with each other. We have to say, you're my brother, you're my sister. I got to love you. I got to respect you. And if we could just get, the Jews for Judaism, 10% focusing that incredible energy and drive, which we got from Abraham and Sarah, is there anything we couldn't accomplish in the world? We would truly transform the world. It would be a very different place. And I hope that we merit to be able to do that. And I'm going to now leave the PowerPoint behind, hopefully, and get back to the Zoom call here. Again, my very sincere apologies for not being able to get the PowerPoint up and running. But the good news is I have a great website, kenspiro.com, which has all my content, and you can go look at this again with the images and all the quotes if you want to see the sources live, and you're welcome to reach out to me through then. I know we're running a little over time, but we started late because of the technical issues, but I'm happy to now, if Revelisha, I don't know if you want to do it, but I'm happy to answer. People put questions in the chat to stay online and answer some questions for you guys.
Okay, so I have a few questions that people messaged me. Number one, you're saying that the 3 traits that you delineated came from Abraham and Sarah. Are they both the same, or are there differences that Sarah brings versus what Abraham brought?
Well, I mean, they both have, obviously, they have to, we having not met both of them personally, and we don't have a lot of, they didn't write their own autobiographies, but it's pretty clear that that to make this incredible team, that they obviously have the same, drive, ideology, worldview. Those personality traits clearly are shared by both of them, in my opinion. There's no question. I mean, men and women bring different things into a marriage, into a relationship, so they bring in a different side. But in terms of shared personality traits, these are intrinsic in who we are, without getting into the very complicated debate about what part in Judaism is the man contributor versus the woman, and why the mother makes you Jewish. But I would say, from the perspective of what I can see, that they both have those, they share both all those traits in common.
Thank you. Someone wants to know, how can they get through to their family about Jewish values, or what you were describing as Torah living? Is it worth it without sounding overzealous, but to make their family, who's not so affiliated, proud to be Jewish? Do you have a tip or a very brief success story?
Well, first of all, again, the number one rule is not to be preachy. And you have to be extremely sensitive nowadays because of the woke nature of a lot of people. They're hypersensitive to particularism. So it's very, as soon as you start sounding off about how what we Jews have done, a lot of people get very, Jews spend way too much time worrying about everyone else but themselves, usually as a people. We give a lot of money in our time. Nothing wrong with helping other groups of people. We have a real soft spot for that and who we are as a people. Most of the money that Jews raise in this world goes to non-Jewish causes, to the tune of about 95% of Jewish giving goes to non-Jewish causes. So that's an issue to be sensitive to, but I think the way that I have found the most successful is the way I started doing it myself. If people are familiar with the presentation I did on World Perfect, is showing people, that how the core values of Western liberal democracy, value of life, peace, social responsibility, these are all ideas that come from this like Judeo-Christian ethics, which is really coming from Judaism. So the way to do it is with facts. And I recommend, if someone's really interested in the topic, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but they listen to the World Perfect presentation or even get the book to demonstrate the transformative impact that Jewish ideas have had on the world when adopted by other people and shared throughout the world, have really shaped the collective consciousness of the human race. So, but the main way to do it is not to be preachy, not to be pushy, and not to sound too particularistic. But I often find asking people, like I did when I created World Perfect, asking them, so what do you think are the values that are the most important values to have for a society to have? And people generally, you could coax out of them the fact these points, proactive responsibility for the world, equality before the law, things like that. And then you can demonstrate that these are really ideas that are not innate in human consciousness, but they're ideas that we directly or indirectly brought to the world. And I think if people are a little bit open and you do it right with a lot of understanding and not too much pushing, you can, I think, effectively transmit those concepts to other people.
Thank you.
I have a question that was sent to me, and the person who sent it asked, how do you explain the secular Jew, be that person American or Israeli, as to how they fit your concept of Torah as a guidance system or software when they demonstrate such ignorance of Torah and Jewish values and thinking?
I'm sorry, the question was, how do we demonstrate to a secular Jew?
How do we explain to the secular Jew, be they American or Israeli, how does that secular Jew fit your concept of Torah as a guidance system or as software when the Jew who is ignorant or is secular demonstrates ignorance of Torah and Jewish values and thinking?
Again, I think you can, I'm not sure I'm exactly understanding the question 100%. Again, it is for me 4 o'clock in the morning. But it seems to me that it's very easy to show Jews the personality traits without the Torah values necessarily in them. And by the way, Rabbi, a point that's very important to make is just because, we have to be very careful when we're doing this and talking to secular Jews, just because there are people who are not, by the traditional sense, religious, who are, this is a little bit side issue, but just because you look religious doesn't necessarily make you a moral person. Just because a person is not observant doesn't necessarily make them immoral. I'm talking on a collective level. There are people who look very religious, and not just talking about Jews, who behave in very immoral ways. They have the external trappings, but not the internal essence of who they are. And there are people who are are seemingly not religious in a conventional way, but are extremely moral, ethical human beings. So it's very important not to fall into that trap, because you especially see in Israel, people like the press loves picking on so-called religious Jews doing things that seem to be immoral. or incorrect. This Knesset member who's religious is embezzling money. So what do you say about that? So the point is rather to focus on the ideas, the values outside of the actual individual. I find it very easy when I talk to Jews who are secular Jews to pull out from them very quickly that they care about the same things that I care about, and that I'm not necessarily in any way better than they are, because I am possibly better educated Jewishly, but rather that we're basically are the exact same raw material, and I just have, invested more time in developing and directing the drive with a Jewish guidance system. I don't think I really answered your question because I'm not sure I actually understood exactly what you're asking. But
I didn't fully either. I was reading what somebody wrote, but I think one message that is very significant is one that I think we live by, both Rabbi Mandel and myself and our shuls, is that people can be very moral, ethical, wonderful people who are not part of the observant community, and they still can be extraordinarily wonderful teachers, educators, and role models. While we certainly hope that people also become observant, the lack of observance does not exclude somebody from being a good moral person, for sure.
100%, 100%. By the way, I am always harping on one of my other, I hate to use the word crusade when talking about Jewish stuff, but for the religious world, because the secular world, the non-observant Jewish world, very much appreciates the idea of tikkun olam. They might not exactly understand what that concept means from a Jewish perspective. The word is grossly misunderstood and overused, I think, but I'm a big believer at messaging the religious Jewish world, and that the purpose of being Jewish, Torah and mitzvot, are fundamental to, like I said, the guidance system of the Jewish people. Our payload, so to speak, but their means to an ends, and the ends of being Jewish is Kiddush Hashem. We're the God squad. That's the word, that's the term I like to use. But our job is to live and act in a way that inspires other people. People should be looking at us and saying, look at these Jews, look at how they are personally, look at their families, look at their communities, look at how they do business. Like you said, exactly, it's so important to recognize that you can look very religious and behave in a very irreligious way, in a very non-Jewish way, in which case you're doing a lot more damage than a Jew who is not claiming to be specific in any way particularly connected to the Jewish people doing it. People are going to specifically look at those of us who are claiming to represent Judaism and the Jewish people. And we have to therefore be hyper cautious whenever we're doing anything as a Jew to recognize that our mission in this world is Abraham's mission. We're supposed to be living and acting in a way, and we're very careful. Rav Noach Weinberg used to always, when he was a young kid, he told us a story when he would want to do something that was questionable. And he would ask his father. His father would say, "Nu Noach, v'soch God." What does God think about this? We should always be asking ourselves, what I'm doing now. We should always balance also stringencies we take in terms of our observance is how they're going to affect other people. Because our relationship with our fellow Jews has to be equally, if not more important than our relationship with God, like our brother, like a relationship of parent to child, as we are with brothers and sisters. So the point you're making is super, super, super important, that we should never get arrogant and think, because we're keeping Shabbat or keeping kosher, that we're necessarily doing a better job. We have a greater potential if you're connected. Jews for Judaism, as I say, are the ultimate package, the hardware and the software, but not to get arrogant and think just because I am keeping Shabbat or wearing a kippah that I'm necessarily going in the right direction or doing the right thing. The spotlight's going to be on me more than other people because I identify as a Jew, and I got to be super careful that I keep that end game in mind and use my talents and my God-given gifts as a Jew in the right direction to connect people to God and elevate the world.
Yeah, thank you.
Rabbi. Just a few more. I have noticed lately in the media outlets, and even some Jews are using or comparing everything and everyone to Hitler. I was wondering why you think this may be happening.
Why people are, I don't know. I think the word, I don't know about Hitler, but the word fascist is coming up a lot. It's just kind of a way of, I think it's being used a lot by cancel culture as a way of shutting down just conversation on things. It's overused word. But there's a lot of terms I find are being used. Racism is the number one word. He's a racist. That's the way you shut things down. Hitler, that immediately ends the conversation. I'm not particularly aware of the word Hitler being used that much, but other terms I see being used a lot, primarily to, as a form of shutting the debate down on the spot. That's it. You can't. You're not legitimate anymore.
How do you reconcile the trait of chesed, kindness, with the image of the two old Jews lighting the menorah on the opposite ends of the synagogue? Divisiveness does not seem compatible with caring.
That's a great point, because it's what that comes from lack of clarity and imbalance. Because first of all, when caring, you only have so much of what I have, whether it's my money or my time, or that I can give. So it's a question of knowing where to focus it, how to use it correctly. So you can't spread yourself too thin. And we all know people who can be very kind to this person or that gift, that organization, but be neglectful or mean to someone else. So it's, like I said, going back to a recognition of when we are dealing with our fellow Jews, recognizing that I may not agree with you, but my brother or my sister. When we start to look at, and it's Revelation, you're talking about an interesting point, in the laws of charity, Judaism never leaves anything to guesswork. This is why having Torah software is so important. I have a certain amount of money. I want to make a difference in the world. How do I know who and how much to give to whom? And the Torah expresses the point that, your first obligation, which seems to be like a no-brainer, is if your stranger needs money to eat and your brother needs money to eat, you got a greater obligation to your brother first, to help them first. It doesn't preclude you giving it to people who you don't know, but you have to have your priorities straight, which goes back to having that Torah software. If a Jew is not, I got to take care of the world, but I'm not focusing on my fellow Jews as being my brothers and sisters. And Jews, by the way, fellow Jews can be very annoying people. It's often a lot easier. I found that I was personally often attracted to subconsciously making friends with a lot of non-Jews because they didn't have the crazy energy that I had. They were more chilled, like my friend I mentioned in the talk, John Frenzel. He was a very laid-back guy. He definitely didn't have that Jewish energy. So it was naturally like, some of my Jewish friends were a lot more annoying. So we have to, it's not necessarily easy to do. Like any parent knows this with a child. You don't necessarily like your kids all the time, especially when they're teenagers, but you always love them. Otherwise they wouldn't survive till adulthood. So it's balancing, it's having that recognition of, even when a Jew is in my face, and Jews can be very strident, confrontational people, of recognizing, even if it's, I don't agree with this person, but this is my brother or my sister. I got to love them and I'm responsible for them. And when we can keep that going as a background program in our heads, we'll learn to deal with, we'll give of our time and our resources more efficiently and effectively. We'll prioritize them correctly. And we won't have a situation of Jews, of us, ignoring or fighting with our fellow brothers and sisters while maybe spending all our time and energy elsewhere, which is very, very destructive to the Jewish people.
Thank you. Okay, maybe just a few more, one or two more. I believe and understand that Jews proportionally have higher drives, but I personally don't feel like I have a grand drive. How should myself and others reconcile this?
Yeah, well, first of all, grand drives. Part of the problem of being Jewish is you don't realize how driven you are, because you hang out generally. I'm not being that. You hang out with a lot of other Jews. I'm telling you, I go to places like Mexico, South Africa, and I'm always blown away by how many people in the world. Literally, there are billions of people in the world. So I'm not knocking the rest of the world. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of sit around and do nothing. It's amazing how undriven so much of the world is. Jews, when you hang out with other Jews, the bar is so high that often we think we're not doing something, but we should never make the mistake of thinking, and this is a real important point, that unless I'm being almost a messianically transformative human being, that I'm not making a difference in the world. We all have the drive. Jews have tremendous potential, and we, in our own little way, not all of us are going to merit to be people who are going to have a massive impact on this world, but all of us do have this incredible, all human beings have the ability. We're all judged on what we do with our uniqueness in this world. God's never going to show me a movie of you and ask me why I wasn't like you, Revelation. He's going to show me two movies. He's going to show me the movie of Ken Spiro, what he did with his life, and Ken Spiro, what he could have done with his life. And the pain I'm going to feel is recognizing that I wasn't the greatest me that I could be. So rather than worry about necessarily how can I transform the world, let's first take time to sit down, think, like, again, I keep quoting Rabbi Weinberg, my rabbi, your rabbi, of doing what we call cheshbon and nefesh, of sitting down and being honest with ourselves about what gifts and abilities I have as a human being and as a Jew, and how can I use that, ideally, along with my Jewish nationalist art mission as being part of the Jewish people, how can I use my unique skill set, even if it's not massively transformative, but to make a difference, even in a small way, because we know that a lot of us doing a little, that's the Yetzer Hara, as we say, is often to think, unless I could transform the world gigantically, then why bother? But a lot of us doing a little can make a huge difference, and that might be the paradigm shift we need to make, is to think big collectively, but to think personally, and not small, but to think big on our own. But how can I use my own, as one human being amongst one Jew amongst many, and one human being amongst the human race? How can I maximize that in a collective way while working with my fellow Jews to make a big difference in the world? And that's, I think, how we really make the difference and change the world and feel happy and satisfied and fulfilled as human beings.
Okay, last question, then we'll let you go back to sleep. Where do you think wokeness is being echoed in history? Is this a repeat of has there been a trend like this in history?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know of any specific parallel to this. I do know of nations in general losing their sense of particularness. Wokeness, I can't think. I think it's a very unique kind of modern byproduct of a melting pot world of mass communication and social media that never existed before. But I do know, and this is very true of Jews, certainly true of nations, that when and this is going back to that talk I mentioned about universalism versus particularism, when people lose their own sense of specialness, it's a very dangerous word. That's where wokeness is so dangerous, is to view my personal identity as being, or my collective identity as being evil or bad or racist, is a very negative, a very dangerous thing to do, because when a people loses its sense of specialness, which doesn't mean superiority, just because I think I'm special doesn't mean I think I'm necessarily better or superior, I have a right to conquer or oppress you. But when people collectively lose their sense of destiny and uniqueness, it bodes very poorly for their future. They lose their collective drive, and that's the history of the collapse of all empires in human history, whether it's the Roman Empire, you name it. So, and by the way, it certainly holds for Jews. We Jews are hypersensitive to everyone but ourselves, which is going back to the point of giving so much of our time and our energy to everyone else but ourselves, somehow believing that everyone else has a right to be unique and special but us. That's a big problem that especially the non-religious Jewish world suffers from. A lot of Jews for every ism but Judaism, as I said before. And while we should care for the world, we need to care for ourselves first, because as it says in the Ethics of the Fathers, if I'm not for myself, who's going to be for me? And but if only for myself, what am I? It's all about being balanced. Everything in this world, especially about being a Jew, is about being balanced, and our relationship between God and each other, and how we live our lives. And we have that balance. If we had balanced Jews, that's when all these things, our drive and our radically transformative thinking, that's when we can use it collectively to again transform the world in the proper way we're supposed to be, as role models for the human race. And I would just end with a thought that I know it sounds like the impossible dream, but the world is not going to leave us alone. It's not going to leave the Jewish people alone. It's not going to leave the Jewish state alone. There's going to be no end to anti-Semitism and no end to Israel bashing until we rise to the responsibility that Abraham gave us. I always say being Jewish might not be comfortable, but it's always meaningful. And we should always say, like we say in the morning, when we wake up, a Jew's supposed to say this. It's in the prayer books, Ashreinu Matov Halkenu, like how happy are we, how good is our lot. That the spotlight might be on us as a people and as a nation, but we have the ability, because of our unique connection and our spiritual genetics, to transform the world in ways that no other people is going to be able to do, and no other people has the obligation to do that we have to do. So let's hope we're capable of doing that. And again, I want to apologize for the delay in the technical issues, and invite people to visit my website, kenspiro.com. You can watch this presentation. I have tons of content online for free. And you guys should stay warm in Canada and come to Israel soon. we'll see you live. Thank you for having
That
me.
was amazing.
Great.
Thank you so much. It
Thank you, Rabbi Spiro.
was worth being patient. Thank you, and all the best to everybody. Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you.
It was outstanding. Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to listen to you always.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Rabbi Spiro. Have a great rest of the night. Thank
Thank
you so much. Us.
All the best. Go and have a good schlaf.
Laila Tov.
Night, Laila Tov, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much.
Be well.